the summer of 2019, a private jet touched down at Teterboro Airport in New Jersey. The man who stepped off had spent decades building an empire of wealth, influence, and secrets. Within weeks, Jeffrey Epstein would be dead in a Manhattan jail cell.
Jeffrey Epstein has died by suicide.
Jeffrey Epstein is dead,
leaving behind a trail of victims, unanswered questions, and a scandal that would shake the foundations of power across 2 continents. This is the story of how one man exploited his connections to the world's elite, constructed an elaborate system of abuse, and for years escaped justice. It's a story about money, manipulation, and the institutions that failed to stop him. Jeffrey Epstein's origins were unremarkable. Born in Brooklyn in 1953 to working-class parents, he showed early aptitude for mathematics. By the 1970s, he was teaching calculus and physics at the prestigious Dalton School in Manhattan, despite lacking a college degree. It was there he made a connection that would change everything. He was charismatic, absolutely. He had this way of making you feel like you were part of something exclusive, something special, even then. Through his position at Dalton, Epstein met the father of a student, Ace Greenberg, the CEO of Bear Stearns. By 1976, Epstein had left teaching and entered the world of high finance. His ascent was meteoric. Within 4 years, he became a limited partner at Bear Stearns, specializing in tax strategies for the ultra-wealthy. But in 1981, Epstein left Bear Stearns under circumstances that remain murky to this day. What happened next would become the central mystery of his financial life. In 1982, Epstein founded his own firm, J. Epstein & Company. His pitch was simple but exclusive. He would only manage money for billionaires. Clients needed a minimum of $1 billion to qualify. Yet despite these claims, only one client was ever publicly confirmed, Leslie Wexner, the founder of Limited Brands and Victoria's Secret. The Wexner relationship was extraordinary. Epstein wasn't just managing his money, he had power of attorney. He was buying properties on Wexner's behalf, including the Manhattan mansion that would later become infamous. The level of control was unprecedented. Wexner gave Epstein access to his fortune and his world. Through Wexner, Epstein penetrated the highest circles of business, philanthropy, and science. He cultivated relationships with Nobel laureates, former presidents, members of the British royal family, and titans of technology and finance. Epstein presented himself as a financial genius and intellectual polymath. He donated to Harvard, funded scientific research, and hosted salons with leading academics. But behind this carefully constructed facade, something far darker was taking shape. Epstein's properties became the infrastructure of his crimes. A mansion in New York, a compound in New Mexico, a ranch in Palm Beach, a Paris apartment, and most infamously, a private island in the U.S. Virgin Islands known as Little St. James. Locals called it Pedophile Island. What happened there would eventually be documented in court filings, victim testimony, and investigative reports that painted a picture of systematic abuse. There was always a new girl, young, vulnerable.
Years old. 16, 17, 14 years old. This is me. This was me. This is me when I met Jeffrey Epstein. This is me when I met Jeffrey Epstein.
He had recruiters who would approach us at malls, parks, schools. They'd say there was this wealthy man who needed a massage therapist, that you could make money. The pattern was consistent. Girls, many of them minors from disadvantaged backgrounds, were recruited under false pretenses. What began as massage appointments became sexual abuse. Some victims were then pressured to recruit others, creating a pyramid of exploitation. This wasn't opportunistic. This was organized, methodical. He kept files on people. He had surveillance equipment throughout his properties. There's evidence he was documenting everything, potentially for leverage. Flight logs from Epstein's private jets, later dubbed the Lolita Express, showed dozens of trips carrying powerful passengers. While presence on a flight doesn't imply wrongdoing, the logs raised troubling questions about who knew what and when. In 2005, The parents of a 14-year-old girl in Palm Beach went to police. Their daughter told them she'd been molested by a wealthy man after being brought to his home. The Palm Beach Police Department launched an investigation. Police recommended federal charges of multiple counts of sexual abuse of minors. The FBI opened an investigation. A 53-page indictment was drafted. Jeffrey Epstein faced the possibility of life in prison. And then, something extraordinary happened. In 2008, Alexander Acosta, then the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of Florida, signed a non-prosecution agreement. Epstein would plead guilty to 2 state charges, 1 count of procuring a person under 18 for prostitution, and 1 count of solicitation of prostitution. He would serve 13 months in a county jail, with work release allowing him to leave for 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. Years later, it emerged that Acosta had been told to back off, that Epstein belonged to intelligence. Whether this was true or a negotiating tactic by Epstein's high-powered legal team remains unclear. Epstein served his time in a private wing of the Palm Beach County Jail. He registered as a sex offender, and then, remarkably, he returned to his life of wealth and influence, largely unchanged. For years, investigative journalists, particularly at the Miami Herald, continued digging. In 2018, reporter Julie K. Brown published a series called Perversion of Justice, tracking down victims and exposing the details of Epstein's sweetheart deal. The public outcry was immediate. In July 2019, federal prosecutors in New York arrested Epstein on new charges of sex trafficking of minors. This time, there would be no deal. Epstein was denied bail and held at the Metropolitan Correctional Center in Manhattan. His trial was set for 2020. Victims prepared to testify. The world waited for answers. But on August 10, 2019, guards found Jeffrey Epstein unconscious in his cell.
Disgraced financier Jeffrey Epstein is dead. Epstein took his own life while he was behind bars facing charges of sex trafficking.
He was pronounced dead at a nearby hospital. The medical examiner ruled it suicide by hanging. The circumstances sparked immediate controversy. Guards had fallen asleep and falsified records. Cameras malfunctioned. Epstein had been removed from suicide watch. Conspiracy theories proliferated, fueled by Epstein's connections and the convenient timing of his death. Whether Jeffrey Epstein killed himself or was killed, his death ensured that many questions would never be answered in court. With Epstein dead, attention turned to those around him. In July 2020, Ghislaine Maxwell, Epstein's longtime associate and alleged procurer of victims, was arrested and charged with conspiracy and sex trafficking. In December 2021, Maxwell was convicted on 5 of 6 counts. She was sentenced to 20 years in federal prison. Ghislaine Maxwell is a predator. She and Epstein were partners in crime. Epstein's estate, valued at over $500 million, was dissolved. The full scope of his network and who else might be held accountable remains unclear. Jeffrey Epstein's story raises profound questions about power, privilege, and accountability. How did a man with a documented history of abusing minors maintain his status among the elite for so long? Why did institutions repeatedly fail his victims? What compromises were made, and by whom? For the survivors, the fight continues. Many have bravely shared their stories, transforming private trauma into public testimony. Their courage has exposed not just one man's crimes, but the mechanisms that enabled them. Little St. James Island sits quiet now, vegetation overtaking the buildings where so many suffered. But the questions echo far beyond its shores. Who else knew? Who else was involved? And most importantly, how do we ensure this never happens again? Jeffrey Epstein built an empire on exploitation, protected by wealth and connections that made him seem untouchable. His death left many questions unanswered. But his victims' voices ensure the questions keep being asked. This is not just the story of what Jeffrey Epstein did. It's the story of what was allowed to happen and what we must never allow again.